So the story that we are going to be dealing with is the story surrounding a man by the name of Abimelech, the son of Gideon, in fact one of several sons of Gideon. And he rises to prominence in a rather wicked manner, and God decisively deals with him in no time. The wicked will not triumph. The wicked will not have their final say. The wicked will not have their day, as it were. And God's intervention in this regard puts everything decisively clear that he does not wink, he does not tolerate, he will not overlook the sins of the wicked. Chapter 9 of the book of Judges is one of the chapters that makes very sad reading. It's a tragic chapter. It's a chapter that you read and you begin to wonder how depraved, how wicked a man can be. And Abimelech is such a wicked man as is portrayed for us here in chapter 9. As I was working my way through Judges chapter 9, there are two individuals that immediately came to mind. The first one was Shaka Zulu. There's a new series of Shaka that is currently running on DSTV. I have not watched a single one of them. I watched the original Shaka way back when some of you were probably not even born, and I don't intend to watch the new one so that I do not corrupt my mind with whatever new things have been added there. But anyway, that's one of the names that came to mind. Shaka was the 19th century king and founder of the Zulu Empire, and he created a fighting force that devastated the entire Southern African region, and whose ripple effects were felt as further north as Zambia and Tanzania. He was ruthless. He fought for extermination, incorporating the remnants of the clans that he smashed into the Zulu Empire. And his military philosophy was never leave an enemy behind. Never leave an enemy behind. And like Abimelech, Shaka was an illegitimate child. And so you understand why his name came to mind. The second name that came to mind was that of Yevgeny Prigozhin, the founder and leader of the mercenary group Wagner in Russia, who was killed in a plane crash on August 23rd. He was a mercenary and gathered together mercenaries of all color and shade that committed atrocities in Africa, in Syria, in Russia, in Ukraine, and other parts of the world. And that seems to me is what Abimelech was. A mercenary warrior. There are 6 major judges in the book of Judges, and there are 6 minor judges. And the one that divides these 12, sitting right at the middle of the first 6 and the last 6, is Abimelech, who himself, in the strictest sense, was not a judge, but a counterfeit judge, a rogue judge, an apostate judge. And so chapter 9 relates the tale of Abimelech, the son of Gideon, born from a relationship that Gideon had with a concubine in Shechem, and who at the death of Gideon began all manner of political manipulation and maneuvers in order to impose himself as king over Israel. Abimelech is not given to us as a judge raised up by God in the manner of all the other judges that God would raise up to serve Israel, to be the savior of Israel against their enemies, sometimes formidable enemies, and God would raise up a judge to lead them, to guide them, and to serve them, and to restore peace and bring calmness in the nation. Abimelech, on the other hand, is characterized as one who asserted his rule over the people. God did not choose him, God did not appoint him, and rather than aiding Israel, he ends up sowing discord, sowing violence and destruction and disunity in the nation. That is who Abimelech was. And as we have already seen in our past messages, God, who in mercy and God who in grace step into the situation and the circumstances of his people through these judges. And although these judges were not so much spiritual reformers, there was a sense in which through what they brought about in the nation, God was reminding them of his grace and of his mercy and his love for them by overcoming their enemies and restoring peace. God was doing so. Because what we see in the book of Judges is a cycle of rebellion, is a cycle of abandoning their loyalty and their fidelity and their faithfulness to the God who had been so good and so gracious to them. So the book of Judges is pictured as a downward spiral, a downward spiritual spiral of the nation, and Abimelech stands as a typical example of that downward spiral, and is introduced to us as one who is bidding for power, one who is hungry for power, and he will seize power at any cost. And the great cost that we see given to us is the extermination, the death of 69 of his brothers, save one who survived and fled. Killed them in cold blood on one day. Like Shaka He did not want to leave any enemy behind in order to entrench himself and consolidate his power and rule over the people, and using the Trump language, the tribal language rather. Listen what he says as he goes to where he was brought up, where his mother lived, Gideon's concubine. And so he goes there and he addresses them. Which is better for you, that all 70 of the sons of Jerubbaal rule over you? He doesn't even say, all the sons of my father rule over you, or that one rule over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. I'm one of you. Shame upon any leader of whatever form who comes with tribal talk as the basis for securing the position of leadership, whether it's in the church, whether it's in the political arena, whether it's any kind of leadership. And that's what Abimelech does. I'm one of you. I'm from here. Wako ni wako, if you know that term from the east. Wakwanu, I'm from amongst you. I'm your flesh. I'm your bone and your flesh. And his mother's relatives spoke all these words on his behalf in the ears of all the leaders of Shechem, and all their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. Vote for me because I'm Kaonde. Vote for me because I speak the same language as you do. Vote for me because we come and share the same ancestry. Vote for me, not those other tribes. We must never allow them to rule over us. But I'm one of you. And they bought into the lie. Yes, he's our brother. And that's how genocide starts. And that's what happened here. Away with the others. Away with the imposters and claimants to leadership. We want our own. And so the seed of destruction has been sown using tribal talk. Using talk that discriminates, and talk that rallies around who you are. We belong to this tribe, we belong to this race, we belong to this nation, and so you define yourself according to those human indicators that would endear you to others. And all the leaders of Shechem came together, and all Beth Millo, and they went and made Abimelech king by the oak of the pillar at Shechem. They have pronounced him king. But he has eliminated all opposition. He has killed in one day all the members of his father's family, except one. But you see, when we see wickedness rise all around us, and when we see the wicked triumph, Often our temptation is to think that God has abandoned his people, God has forgotten about us, and everything is just chaotic as things were in the book of Judges. In those days, Israel had no king and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. Where is God in all this? Is he blind to what is going on? Is he blind to what is happening? Not at all. God is still on the throne and is in total control, is in control over the entire period of the book of Judges, is in total control even in this chapter that appears so horrendous and chaotic and purposeless. And everything seems to be driven by one man, selfish man, wicked man, hungry for power, and power he must have at all costs. God is in control, and God will intervene, and he does, and brings about the fall and the destruction of this self-imposed ruler, Abimelech. Self-made king, and his followers, his mercenaries, the Wagner of the Old Testament. He was their warlord. There is that refrain that you often hear on Facebook, on people's status, on TikTok, and I don't want peace. I want problems. That's Abimelech. I don't want peace. I want problems. Well, is God going to let him have his day? Not at all. God is not going to allow him. And for the sake of his people, God will come in judgment. He has shed the blood of his half-brothers. He has killed them. He has eliminated, so he thought and so he believed, all opposition that may arise. No enemy must be left behind alive. They must be killed so that he can rule unchallenged. But there's one who is going to challenge him, and whose power he cannot overcome, and that is God. Well, how does God do it? Well, notice how God does it, and he does it in three ways. Firstly, God preserves the life of the youngest son of Gideon, Jotham. He preserves him. Look at verse 5. And he went to his father's house at Ophrah and killed his brothers on one stone. Mark that. On one stone. But Jotham, the youngest son of Jerubbaal, was left, for he hid himself. This godly young man, everyone else that was older than him has been killed in cold blood. He alone has survived. He alone is the true remnant. And God preserves the life of this young man so that by the grace of God he may become the spokesperson, so to say, for God, and stand on the side of truth and restore sanity in a world, in a nation that was upside down. God preserves this young man. And as a spokesman for God, we read in verse 9 how he now addresses the people. Standing on top of Mount Gerizim, he cried out and said to the people, "Listen to me, you leaders of Shechem, that God may listen to you." That's the first mention of God in this chapter. The trees, one said, went out and he gives this parable, and in this parable is essentially saying, you have made a choice, and what you have chosen is this brabble. Thistles. And thistles that are going to prick you and to harm you. Now therefore, if you acted in good faith and integrity, verse 16, when you made Abimelech king, and if you have dealt well with Jerubbaal and his house, and have done to him as his deeds deserved, for my father fought for you, and risked his life, and delivered you from the hand of Midian, and you have risen up against my father's house this day, and have killed his sons, 70 men on one stone, and have made Abimelech the son of his female servant king over the leaders of Shechem, because he's your relative? How tribal you can be. You have paralyzed the nation. You have abandoned the faith of my father. You rejoice in what you have done, but it is wrong. So God intervenes and raises up Jotham, the youngest of the sons of Gideon. The second thing that God does in intervening to bring about the downfall of this self-made king was to sow the seed of discord and confusion in the camp of Abimelech. That's what God does. Look at verse 22. Abimelech ruled over Israel 3 years, and God sent an evil spirit between Abimelech and the leaders of Shechem, and the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech, that the violence done to the 70 sons of Jerubbaal might come, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother, who killed them, and on the men of Shechem, who strengthened his hands to kill his brothers. So confusion now reigns in the camp. They are now divided against one another, and this is God intervening in the situation. Evil will not carry the day all the time. Evil will not win unless God is not there. And God sent. The direct activity of God, the intervention of God in the affairs of men. Wickedness has arisen, and wickedness must be brought down. And so there is this son of Ebedi, who moved into Shechem with his relatives, and the leaders of Shechem put confidence in him. A rival camp. That's what always happens in mercenary camps. Some of you may have heard of Fode Sanko, a terrible, terrible warlord in Sierra Leone, who used to cut the hands and the feet of the people and gouge out their eyes. And always there's someone who has enough sense and enough wisdom in them to realize this is not right. This must not be allowed to go on. And sometimes God is the one who works in mysterious ways, his wonders to perform, to crush down such wickedness. And so that is what God does. Look at verse 23. And the leaders of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. These are the same leaders who were inclined to follow him in verse 3. And they said, he is our brother. There's now confusion in the camp. But there's one final way in which God intervened in the affairs of his people to bring down and crush wickedness. God exacted judgment on the wicked Abimelech using a very weak vessel. A weak vessel. Let's go back to Judges 9. Towards the end of the chapter. Let me begin to read from verse 50. Then Abimelech went to Thebez and encamped against Thebez and captured it, but there was a strong tower within the city, and all the men and the women and all the leaders of the city fled to it, to the tower, and shut themselves in, and they went up to the roof of the tower. And Abimelech came to the tower and fought against it and drew near to the door of the tower to burn it with fire. Destruction everywhere. And a certain woman, her name is not even given, just some unknown woman, threw an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. There he was about to light the fire to burn the tower, and together with all the people that had sought refuge in there, because they were up against his leadership. And then this woman throws a millstone that crushes his skull. And he knew who had thrown that skull on him. And so he commands his armor bearer, draw your sword, verse 54, and kill me, lest they say of me, a woman killed him. And his young man thrust him through, and he died. 3 years that he ruled, 3 years only. God allowed him to rule for 3 years, and God stepped in to demonstrate his power over all rule, over all humanity, over every leader. He exalts and he deposes and he humbles, and he does just that as an act of judgment. And we are told in verse 56, thus God returned the evil of Abimelech. It's God who raised up this woman. God returns now the evil of Abimelech, which he committed against his father in killing his 70 brothers. And God also made all the evil of the men of Shechem return on their heads. And upon them came the curse of Jotham the son of Jerubbaal. God exacts his judgment through a weaker vessel. He falls at the hands of a woman. And God can use us. And he can use us in any situation and circumstance where we ourselves feel we are incapable we are unable. But the power that works is not within us, it is in him who has called us to do his bidding and to do his work. Is that not what the Lord has done in securing our salvation? Through weakness, through something that no one in their greatest attainment of wisdom and intellect would have imagined and thought of the method that God has devised for our salvation. God coming into this world and being born of a virgin woman as a helpless baby who has to go to the cross and die. And not just die a natural death, but a horrible, despicable death, not as a victim of the hatred of man, but as a way that God himself has appointed for the salvation of his people. And through the weakness of the cross, we find our salvation. Through the weakness of the cross, the devil has been toppled from the throne. Satan has been disarmed. The victory cry rings through the world. Christ reigns. Christ is king. Satan is defeated. Abimelech is no more. Satan is no more. In terms of his stranglehold over us, in terms of continuing to keep away people from the glory of the gospel that Christ has come to preach to us, lost sinners. The powers of the enemy have been disarmed, and Christ reigns on the throne. And the devil has only got power to do what the Lord would allow him to do. He does not have free reign. He's a dog that is on a leash. Praise be to God for the magnificence of his grace and for the intervening grace and mercy that comes at the right time. Abimelech rises and Abimelech falls. He killed his brothers on a stone, and a millstone from the hand of a woman comes down and crushes him. You reap what you sow. Amen.
Amen.